What was every president's greatest accomplishment? Well, let's talk about it. George Washington, the two-term president. He made it clear what the role of the presidency was and quit in 1797, setting a precedent for all future presidents that came after him, which would be followed until 1940 before becoming law in 1951. John Adams, avoiding war with France. In the Revolutionary War, France played a huge role in helping the United States, mostly because everybody hated Britain. But France was like, dude, you gotta repay us. And John Adams was like, no, so we're not going to war. 3, Thomas Jefferson. This one's a no-brainer. Should just be the Louisiana Purchase. I mean, doubled the size of the country, 15 million US dollars. Not much else to say there. Before we go further, if you enjoyed my series of all 46 presidents and these little post-series videos, please subscribe to the channel, as it's the very best way to support the hard work that I've done for these videos. And now let's continue. James Madison, leading the nation through the War of 1812. Britain burned the Capitol and the White House, but Madison stayed strong, kept the United States hopeful, and led them through the crisis near perfectly. Monroe, it's got to be the Monroe Doctrine, establishing U.S. influence in the Western Hemisphere. People take that for granted today, I feel like, and it's mostly attributed to his successor, John Quincy Adams, but it's the Monroe Doctrine, so Monroe. John Quincy Adams. This one was explained more in my video about him, but the Amistad case. This was way after he was president, though, so let's find a new one. His support in infrastructure and education. He greatly supported the building of new roads, new schools, and new canals. 7, slightly contrary to what I consider to be an accomplishment, expanding the power of the presidency for Andrew Jackson. I believe that the president should be a less powerful job than it has been recently. Look at people like Coolidge and George Washington who wanted that position to be less powerful. But Jackson vetoed a lot of bills and made the veto a popular tool. 8, for Van Buren, the U.S. Treasury system. It was hugely beneficial for the United States economy. Even though there was a recession during his term, the long-term influence was there. 9, William Henry Harrison. Of course, died just a month into his term, gave the longest inaugural address at over 8,000 words. Jeez, I'd be bored after the first 5,000. John Tyler, adding Texas and Florida to the Union, the annexation of Texas, who was an independent country since 1836, but he brought them into the Union, which was a huge boost for the economy. 11, James K. Polk, Manifest Destiny expansion. They had just gotten all that territory from Louisiana Purchase in 1804 under Jefferson, but then he was like, we want California, we want Arizona, New Mexico, all that territory from Mexico. He got all the Oregon territory from Britain. I don't quite approve of how he did it by just fighting everybody for it, but you know, the United States expanded their footprint, so things were well on the American side. Zachary Taylor. He was the first president. Taylor was the first president in what I consider to be the road to civil war. Yes, the nation was divided over slavery for decades. But the Compromise of 1850 was the first, whoa, okay, we're really becoming divided. And Taylor did a pretty good job keeping us together until he died 16 months into his term. Similarly, though, for Fillmore, signing the Compromise of 1850. When you take over for a president who just dies, you have no notice. At a moment's notice, no training, no margin for error. You just got to go do it. And Fillmore was definitely one of the worst presidents. Compromise of 1850 was not successful, but it did get California admitted to the Union as a free state. Franklin Pierce, not a lot to choose from. Often remembered for his Kansas-Nebraska Act. I'm writing a whole essay about that in my class right now. But the Gadsden Purchase. Arizona, New Mexico territory. Yeah, a couple million people live there. Thank you, Franklin Pierce. James Buchanan. This one was tough. My best video was saying James Buchanan was the worst president. But in that video, I do talk about the Utah territory, some of the Nevada territory. It's the best I can do for you with Buchanan. He's not giving me a lot to work with. Abraham Lincoln. Easy call, preserving the Union, the abolishment of slavery. Other than Washington, the greatest president in American history. It's either Washington or Lincoln. I go back and forth on them all the time. Johnson, again, not really giving me much to work with, but I suppose give him credit for the purchase of Alaska from Russia. Just 2 cents an acre, an absolute bargain. Same with the Louisiana Purchase, although the purchase of Alaska doesn't quite get the recognition as the Louisiana Purchase, and rightfully so, but big. Ulysses Grant, his advocacy for civil rights. It was, I suppose, during Johnson's term that African Americans got the right to vote, but that wasn't necessarily his doing. Grant, huge for civil rights. Hayes, civil service reform and ending Reconstruction. Although that is controversial, Reconstruction was on its way out of the South even before the Compromise of 1877, but the civil service reform, Hayes really got that ball rolling. Garfield, he just kept on going with civil service reform. He was only president for about 6 months, and he spent half of that time dying in a hospital bed. Arthur, the Pendleton Civil Service Reform Act. I explained that more deeply in my Arthur video, but he's again one of those presidents not really giving me a whole lot to work with. Cleveland, vetoing corruption bills. I know this one may seem strange, but Grant had a lot of corruption in his cabinet. A lot of presidents did, same with Harding. And as for Cleveland, he really vetoed a lot of the bills that probably got a lot of his support from his cabinet. Benjamin Harrison, the Sherman Antitrust Act. This one is also further explained in the video. The link to the whole series will be in the description. For McKinley, it would have to be winning the Spanish-American War. And I know winning a war can be a controversial term. The Philippine-American War was shady. So, sharp contrast there. Teddy Roosevelt, the national park system. As much heat as I give Teddy for his poor foreign policy in the Brownsville affair, his personality just absolutely through the roof. Hugely revolutionary president. Taft. This is a tough one because he had I don't want to say irrelevant term. There were a lot of just quick 4-year terms who didn't really do much in office, but this is one where I will go beyond the White House for. His service as the Supreme Court. He much preferred that job than being the President of the United States. Woodrow Wilson. The League of Nations idea. Wilson, not a good president. He is the rage bait president of YouTube and of the internet. But finding the League of Nations, that was good. 29. Warren Harding, the Budget Accounting Act. It was all about modernizing just federal budgeting, and I don't actually talk about that in my video, so I wanted to give it some recognition here. 30. Calvin Coolidge, weakening the power of the presidency. I know at Jackson I said making it stronger was his biggest accomplishment, but for Jackson it was just kind of the idea of the presidency. It was well established. Coolidge, 30th president. He wanted that job to be less powerful. He was a very hands-off president. Probably my favorite, just character-wise, my favorite president. Herbert Hoover. Not a whole lot. I've got to say his character. He is thought of as a great humanitarian, much like Jimmy Carter. Not a great presidency, but very good character. Just a really good person. Franklin Roosevelt. It's got to be the New Deal. It's controversial. Some people really don't like it. I think it was hugely beneficial, winning the World War II. Although it's kind of hard to say, again, like who won a war, and then you could say that Truman won World War II with the use of atomic power. I would say the founding of NATO under Truman. As for the Cold War presidents, Dwight Eisenhower, the interstate highway system. Love it, love it, love it. You can go from sea to shining sea on one highway. You can go from Maine down to Florida. Good interstate highway system. As for JFK, the space program, we shall go to the moon. LBJ, LBJ is another president who got a lot done. Expansion of civil rights. It sounds easy. Nixon, opening diplomatic relations with China. We are 5% of the world's population. We need to trade with the other 95%. And Nixon fought off for Watergate, got a lot done before that. Gerald Ford, restoring trust in the government. I talk about this a lot in my video about him, but Nixon's resignation, Agnew's resignation, a lot of Americans were beginning not to trust their government. And Nixon and Agnew were a big part of that. And Ford, the pardon was controversial, but he definitely made a lot of progress towards restoring trust. Jimmy Carter, another kind of layup. The Camp David Accords, the Israel-Egypt relations. They'd been at conflict for a very long time, and then Carter the peacemaker that he really was for his whole life. He's really admirable for that. Reagan ending the Cold War. You could credit that to George H.W. Bush, could credit it to Reagan, could go either way. Reagan also got a lot done. As for George H.W. Bush, the Gulf War. Huge for the Iraqi government. His also just character. He wasn't necessarily what you'd say charismatic, but he just had a way of talking that made you like, wow, I really like this guy. Clinton, economic expansion. The 90s were a time of extreme prosperity. Whether Clinton was in office or not had anything to do with that. Up in the air, but you do need to credit him for it. George H.W. Bush, leading after 9/11. There was a lot that George W. Bush did that was not successful. But keeping the country united and even hopeful after 9/11, just huge. Very few presidents would have been able to do that. Barack Obama, the Affordable Care Act, known as Obamacare. At the time of recording this video, it's like, will it get repealed, will it not? But it gave healthcare to a lot of Americans who wouldn't otherwise have it. Donald Trump, the First Step Act. I talk about this more in my video about him. As for Joe Biden, the Infrastructure Investment Act, the nation's largest infrastructure law for decades. He and John Quincy Adams are major infrastructure presidents. Let me know in the comments what you agree with, what you don't, and I will see you next week for every president's biggest mistake.